I'm here to tell you you lost that listing before you even knocked on the door. And I want to tell you exactly why. And it wasn't because your commission was too high. It wasn't because the seller found a cheaper agent on Facebook. You lost it because you walked in with the same generic pitch every other agent in that neighborhood already gave them. The same comps printout, the same laminated marketing folder, the same line about your years of experience. Sellers can smell a copy-paste presentation from the driveway. Now, in the last video, I showed you how to build a NotebookLM library out of real training materials. Today, I'm going to walk you through the exact process of turning that library into a listing presentation specific to one house, one seller, and one specific situation, built the night before instead of recycled from the last 20 appointments. So a quick recap for anybody just joining the series. NotebookLM is a free tool from Google. It was just rebranded and renamed that only answers from the sources you load into it. So that's your own videos, your own scripts, your own transcripts and documents. So every answer comes back grounded in real material instead of a chatbot guessing with confidence. You haven't built your first notebook yet, go watch the video first, because everything I'm about to walk through assumes you've already got a library of listing presentation content sitting there ready to be pulled from. This video picks up exactly where that one left off, moving from having the library to actually using it on a real appointment this week. Let's talk numbers for a second, because this isn't a soft skills conversation, it's a revenue conversation. So if your average commission on a listing runs anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000 or $25,000 or more, and a sharper, more specific presentation moves your win rate up by even one appointment out of every 10, that's real money sitting on the table every single month. You keep recycling that same generic folder in the presentation. Most agents never do that math. They treat presentation prep as a chore to rush through instead of the single highest leverage 20 minutes in their entire week. And then they wonder why the agent across town keeps winning the listings they were sure they had locked up. Now, here's the mistake almost every agent makes with their listing presentation, technology or not. They build one generic deck and reuse it for every single seller, swapping out the address and the photo and calling it customized. A seller downsizing after the kids left home doesn't really care about the same things as a seller relocating for a job in 90 days. A seller who inherited a house from a parent is having a completely different emotional experience than a seller who's flipping a property for profit. One deck cannot serve all four of those people well, and trying to make it serve all four, well, that's exactly why so many presentations feel flat the second you're standing in the living room. This is where your notebook earns its keep. Now, before I ever open a slide or print a single page, I ask my notebook a specific question built around the actual seller I'm meeting. I type in something like, the seller inherited the home from a parent and feels guilty about selling fast. What do these sources say about handling a seller in an emotional, non-financial decision versus a purely financial one? And because that notebook is loaded with real interviews from agents who's navigated that exact situation hundreds of times, it hands me back language, tone, and pacing built for that specific emotional reality instead of a generic script that ignores it completely. Let me walk you through the 4 questions I ask my notebook before every single listing appointment in order, because the order matters as much as the questions themselves. So question 1, what does this seller actually want beyond the sales price? Second question, what objections is this specific type of seller most likely to raise based on their situation? And question number 3, what comparable properties and market data points will resonate most given their timeline? Question 4, how do the top producers in these sources structure the first 5 minutes of their appointment to build trust before ever mentioning price? 4 questions, 4 grounded answers. And by the time I've done, I've got the actual skeleton of tomorrow's presentation instead of a blank page at 11 at night. Now let's take question number 1 and go a little bit deeper, because this is the question most agents skip entirely, and it's the one that changes everything else downstream. Ask your notebook, based on these sources, what are the sellers actually optimizing for beyond price, speed, certainty, convenience, or emotional closure? The answer that comes back, grounded in real interviews, will usually surface something most agents never say out loud in their pitch, that plenty of sellers will take $15,000 less for a guaranteed close date, or a buyer who won't nickel and dime them through the inspection and the request for repairs. Once you know what this specific seller is actually optimizing for, every other part of your presentation gets built around that instead of your own assumptions of what they should care about. Now, question number 2, objections. So load every objection handling video you have into that same NotebookLM system. And before the appointment, ask it to predict the 3 most likely objections for this specific seller based on their situation and timeline. A seller in a hurry to relocate is going to push back differently than a seller who inherited a property that has no urgency at all. So ask the notebook to pull the strongest counters for each predicted objection directly from your source material. The actual language top producers used when they heard that same pushback in a real room. You walk in tomorrow having already rehearsed the exact conversation instead of discovering the objection live and scrambling for an answer in front of the person you're trying to earn business from. Question 3 is market data. And this is where most agents either drown the seller in spreadsheets or skip the data entirely and hope charm carries the meeting. Neither works, so you're going to load your MLS exports and comp sheets for the specific neighborhoods into the notebook, and you're going to ask it to summarize only the 3 or 4 data points that matter most given the seller's actual priority from question 1. If they're optimizing for speed, you don't need 6 months of price trend charts. You need an average days on market for homes priced correctively versus homes that sat because they were priced too high. The notebook strips out the noise and hands you the exact data that supports the story you're already telling, instead of 40 slides nobody in that living room even asked you to see. Question 4 is the first 5 minutes, and I'd argue it's probably the most important 5 minutes of the entire appointment because it's where trust gets built or lost before a single number gets discussed. So ask your notebook what the strongest listing presentation in your sources do differently in that opening window. You usually find a consistent pattern across top producers. They may ask questions before they present anything. They get the seller talking about their actual situation and goals before ever opening a folder or a laptop. Use that grounded pattern to script your own opening 2 or 3 questions specific to the seller's situation from what you already know. So that first 5 minutes feels like a conversation instead of a sales pitch, walking through the front door. Now let's break down 4 common seller types because the questions stay the same, but the answers shift completely depending on who's sitting across from you. And knowing that pattern ahead of time makes your notebook session even faster. So the relocating seller is optimizing for speed and certainty. They're going to trade a little bit of price for a clean, guaranteed close date that lines up with the moving truck already scheduled. The downsizing empty nester is optimizing for a smooth, low-stress process. They've usually lived in the house for decades, and the biggest objection isn't price. It's the emotional weight of letting go. So your opening 5 minutes needs to honor that before anything else gets discussed. Now, the inherited property seller is often carrying guilt or family tension. Sometimes there are multiple heirs who disagree, and your notebook can help you find language for navigating a group decision instead of a single decision maker. Now, of course, the investor seller only cares about net proceeds and timelines, so you skip the emotional framing entirely and lead straight into the numbers because anything else reads as wasting their time. Here's what that looks like pulled together in one real example. So say you have a listing appointment tomorrow with a seller relocating for a new job in 60 days. You ask your notebook the 4 questions, and here's roughly what comes back. Priority is speed and certainty over squeezing out the last few $1,000s. Likely objections are pricing too aggressively out of fear and sitting on the market, and worry about coordinating a sale with a cross-country move. Data points that matter are days on market and correct pricing versus overpricing in this specific zip code, not a 6-month trend chart. Opening move is asking about the new job and the moving timeline before ever mentioning square footage or price per square foot. That's a 15-minute research session that used to take an agent hours of guessing, or worse, never happened at all, and the presentation just went completely generic. One warning before you build your first notebook-driven presentation, because I've watched agents make this mistake and it costs them credibility fast. Do not read the notebook's answer word for word in front of a seller. It's research. It's not a script to recite. If you walk in sounding like you memorized a paragraph off a screen, sellers do notice. The same way they notice a copy and paste email. So take the grounded insight, the objection language and data point, and say it in your own words, your own pacing, the way you'd actually talk to a neighbor at a barbecue. The notebook's job is to make sure you know what to say. Your job is still to say it like a human being who's sitting in the room with them. not a person performing a script they didn't actually write. I want to be honest about something here because I don't want anybody thinking this replaces actually knowing your market and doing your job. The notebook doesn't know this specific house. It doesn't know the seller's tone or a voice or their body language when they mention their late father's woodshop out back. That part is still you, and it always will be. What the notebook does is remove the guesswork on structure, language, and pattern. Those are the parts that used to take years of trial and error to get right, so you can spend your prep time thinking about the human being instead of reinventing your entire presentation format from scratch every single week. Now, once you got your 4 answers back, here's how you actually assemble that presentation itself. So you're going to take that priority insight from question 1, you're going to make it the headline of your opening conversation, not a bullet point buried on page 6. You're going to take the objection language from question 2 and build it directly into your talking points before the seller even raises the concern. So you're addressing it proactively instead of playing defense. Then you take that trimmed data points from question 3 and you put them on 1 page, not 12. Take the opening questions from question 4 and literally write them out on index card if you need to, because that first 5 minutes is not the place to freestyle when you're nervous walking up to a stranger's front door. Most sellers interview more than 1 agent before they sign, and that means your presentation isn't just competing against silence, it's competing against another agent standing in that same living room a day before or a day after you. Ask your notebook directly what differentiates a winning presentation from a losing one when a seller is comparing multiple agents. Based on everything in those sources, your sources, the pattern that tends to surface is specifically one that beats polish every time. The agent who clearly did homework on this exact house and this exact seller situation beats the agent with a nicer folder and more generic pitch. That's actually good news for you, because a fancier marketing packet is expensive and slow to build. But a sharper, more specific set of talking points built from a 15-minute notebook session costs you nothing but a little bit of prep time, and that's going to happen the night before. So build a notebook for this specific listing while you're at it. So separate from your general presentation library, the same way I described in the last video for active transactions, load the seller's active situation notes. Any comps you pulled, any details they mentioned on the phone when you first talked. As the appointment approaches, and after it happens, keep adding to that single listing notebook, whatever, data points, PDFs, documents, intel from the internet, everything. And the counteroffer language as well, the inspection concerns, the buyer feedback from showings. By the time you're deep into escrow, you've got a complete searchable record of the transaction that answers questions in seconds instead of you scrolling through 3 weeks of text messages trying to remember what was agreed to on a phone call 2 days ago. Now, some of you are going to ask if this feels less personal, less like you. And if a tool is helping you structure your presentation, I'd push back on that completely. A generic laminated folder recycled for the 40th time this year is the thing that feels impersonal. Not a presentation built the night before around this specific seller's actual situation. The notebook isn't writing your presentation, it's handing you the research. It's handing you the research a great assistant would hand you if you had one sitting behind you for every single appointment, digging through years of proven material so you don't have to start from zero. You still walk in and deliver it in your own voice, your own pacing with your own read of the room, because that part was never going to be automated and it shouldn't be. Go back to the audio interview feature I showed you in the last video because it's built for exactly this moment too, not just general training. Now, once your notebook hands you the answers to your 4 questions, ask it to generate an audio overview specifically on tonight's talking points for tomorrow's appointment. You'll get a short conversation walking you through the priority, the objections, the data, the opening spoken back to you instead of sitting in a document you'll skim once and forget. Play it in the car on the drive over, play it on your phone. You show up having heard your own presentation logic out loud already, which matters more than people think. Because the first time you hear your own argument spoken instead of read is usually the moment you catch the weak spot inside of it. Let's go deeper on pricing specifically, because that's the single highest stakes conversation in the entire appointment and the one agents fumble most under pressure. Ask your notebook what language the top producers use when a seller pushes back on a price recommendation with, "My neighbor sold for more." You'll typically get back something built around separating emotion from data without ever telling the seller that they're wrong. Something like acknowledging the neighbor's number while walking through specific differences in condition, timing, and terms that explain the gap, instead of arguing or caving on the number just to keep the peace. Rehearse that specific exchange out loud before you walk in, because pricing is the one place where hesitation in your voice costs you the negotiation before it even starts. Track this over the next 90 days and you'll have real proof instead of a hunch. Note your listing appointment to signed agreement ratio before you started building notebook-driven presentations, then track it going forward. Most agents have never actually measured this number. They just feel generally good or bad about how appointments went. A specific sharper presentation built around a specific seller's actual priorities should move that ratio. And if it doesn't after a genuine 90-day test, that's useful information as well. It tells you the gap was somewhere else in your process, not the presentation itself. Either way, you're no longer guessing about what's working, you're actually measuring it. So let's talk about what happens after that appointment, because the same notebook that helped you prep can help you follow up. If the seller didn't sign on the spot, and plenty of good ones don't, ask your notebook what the strongest follow-up sequences look like for a seller who needs more time to think versus a seller who's comparing you against another agent. You're going to get grounded language for both situations instead of sending the same generic thank you email everybody else sends the same night. That follow-up is where a lot of listings actually get won. Days after the meeting, once the seller has had time to compare you to whomever else they interviewed. And most agents drop the ball right there because they never had a plan for it in the first place. I know the excuse already because I've said it myself about other things. I don't have time to do a research session before every single appointment, and that's fair. Except once you build the habit, this isn't an hour or two project, it's 15 to 20 minutes. And you've already spent that much time or more digging through old presentations, trying to remember what you said last time, or worse, showing up with nothing customized at all and hoping charm carries the room. This isn't an extra step added on top of your prep. It replaces the scattered, unfocused version of prep most agents are already doing badly with a focused version that already produces something sharper in less total time than the old way ever took. Here's your assignment for this week. Before your next listing appointment, open your notebook and ask the 4 questions I just walked you through: priority, objections, data, and opening. Write the questions down. Build your talking points directly from what comes back instead of pulling out last month's folder and swapping the address. Time yourself doing it, because I bet it takes you under 20 minutes once you've done it twice. And compare that 20 minutes against the outcome of walking in with a presentation actually built for the specific person in the specific house that's sitting across from you, instead of a template built for nobody in particular. If you run a team, this gets even more powerful, because that notebook just doesn't have to live in your head. You share it with every agent on your team. And suddenly your mega team has a brand new team member prepping for the third listing appointment. For the third listing appointment ever, they have access to that same exact grounded research a 15-year veteran would build for themselves. Everyone on the team asks the same 4 questions before every appointment. Everybody pulls from the same proven material. And your entire team's presentation quality moves up together instead of depending on whichever agent happened to have the most experience walking in that day. That's not a small thing for a broker trying to raise the floor under an entire office, not just the ceiling above your top producer. And here's the part that actually compounds over time in a way that laminated folders never could. Now, every listing appointment you run through this process adds another data point to your notebook. Which objections actually came up, which opening questions actually landed, which data points the seller actually cared about versus the ones you thought would matter. You feed those real outcomes back into your notebook after each appointment. Everybody on your team should do it as well. Same notebook, give everybody access. A quick note on what worked and what didn't. And your next session gets sharper because it's not just built on other people's proven material anymore. It's built on your own track record as well, stacking on top of the industry wisdom instead of replacing it. That's the difference between agents who treat AI like a party trick and agents who treat it like a research department that never sleeps. One group asks a chatbot to write them a generic script and wonders why it doesn't convert. The other group builds a grounded library. asks it sharp, specific questions tied to a real seller, and walks into every appointment already knowing what that person actually needs to hear. That second group is going to win more listings this year, not because they're smarter or worked harder, but because they stopped guessing and started asking better questions of material that's already proven to work. I'm Connor with Honor. You can see the rest of this series at Santa Clarita artificialintelligence.com. So go build your 4 questions before your next appointment. Go walk into that living room with a presentation built for the person standing in front of you, not a folder built for nobody. That's how you win the listing before you ever say a number out loud. I'm Connor with Honor. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.